Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the JKL Media Podcast, where we do one-offs of movies, TV shows, books, comics, whatever that captures our fancy at the moment. And this time, we're going back to something that I think everybody in our age group might be familiar with, but younger listeners might have no clue what we're going to be talking about. And that would be the 1974 made-for-TV movie, The Questor Tapes, which was a series pilot created by Gene Roddenberry of Star Trek fame and was also co-written with him with another Star Trek alumnus, Gene L. Coon, who was also credited with really helping steer the original Star Trek series into the final shape and form that we all became familiar with. This is a interesting movie about a android who has incomplete memory tapes and is, as a result, must find his creator and find out what his purpose is before he will self-destruct. And it stars a pre-MASH Mike Farrell. Robert Foxworth plays the android Questor. And then we have a raft of, at that time, very familiar character actors, probably most notably John Vernon and Lou Ayres, who has a pretty easy role. I don't even think he has to open his eyes for it. But and you might recognize other character actors like James Shikita. Walter Koenig has a very small part in the movie, and Majel Barrett, who you may know was Gene Roddenberry's wife or husband, wife. They were a husband-wife team and played Nurse Chapel on the Star Trek series, as well as doing the voice of the computer. She also played Deanna Troy's mother. So she's
Waxana Troy.
yeah. And so she has a fair role, not a big role as well in this. So it's a very intriguing premise for the movie. And generally, for me, it hangs together pretty well. I think the special effects are not too bad given the time period. And it uses matte paint in one particular scene. And I'm old school. I love matte paintings when they're incorporated into live action. And I thought it was done pretty well. But it raises some interesting questions that have become even more relevant today about AI. And oddly enough, the movie probably fell out of favor for a while, I think, because it felt so dated, but the concepts never really went out of date. And I think the AI aspect of the story is even more relevant today than ever with things like Chat GPT and everything that's come on board less seemingly out of nowhere. I'm very curious with that to hear my co-hosts' initial overall impressions of the movie and whether or not they had seen it before. And I'll start with you, Karen. Have you seen this movie before, and what are your quick thoughts on it?
No, I hadn't seen it before.
Wow.
It was very reminiscent of backdoor pilots in those
Mm.
days.
Yep.
The music, the special effects, that sort of thing. It really did put me in the mind of those kind of one-offs or two-offs, things that were created to maybe become more, but ended up standing on their own because it wasn't picked up or whatever. We don't do that much anymore. And it's sad to me that we miss out on some things that might be decent movies that, because no one's willing to take a chance on it. But this is definitely dated. I'll say that right up front. But I think for the time period, it was very much in character. It was 1974. It was a time that we had that kind of opening music that sounded a little crackly, maybe. Some of the, it was, some of the acting was 70s acting as well. And that, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's very reminiscent of
Mhm.
the other things around in that time period. So I enjoyed it. It seemed to go pretty fast for me. And I'm glad that we watched it because this is definitely, it was right up my alley. This is the kind of thing I would have watched. But okay, and I'm gonna make you guys sad. I was 6 years old when this came out. So I probably just barely missed it.
Jesse.
I do not remember watching this, though I might have. It did not. I remember Genesis 2, right? That was another Roddenberry episode and it's set in the future, right? But I don't remember this one. It is very much of the time. and I will bring up pacing. I when on Next Stop Everywhere, Charles and I talk classic Who from the 60s and 70s and early 80s, as well as modern Who. And one of my complaints about classic Who is often it's a 6-part story that could be told in 3. And so there were scenes where I go, this is so much of the time where, and one of the things that made me remember that is there was a podcast where they were talking about stories, a writer, and someone mentioned I was watching a Barnaby Jones, and we showed them get out of the car, walk up the driveway all the way to the door with no dialogue.
Yep.
And you're like, we would never do that today.
Oh.
We can. So that said, and also I'm sure we're going to talk about the link to data.
Yep.
This was really well done. I enjoyed it a lot. I have a few nitpicks and I have a few complaints when we break it down to a little more specific.
Mhm.
But I think this would have been an interesting series. I think you could have done this is a blend of Highway to Heaven, and then also because it could be a case of the week, right?
Yep.
Where he's helping someone,
Yep.
yet the overarching arc. And so I think it was it was a good concept. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the Hollywood Reporter. We talked about that in our Babylon 5 podcast a little bit, or I think we're pre-recording, that networks don't do pilots anymore.
No.
Because they buy a concept and they give it directly to series. But there was a time when millions of dollars were spent on pilots, on drama pilots, on comedy pilots. It gave work to everyone. It gave everyone a chance to do things. And I don't know if it's a better or worse world, but I'm so glad that we have this and that it was released in a way. And I'm curious, what were the bonus features on the Blu-ray, Lou? Because I ended up watching this online, and we will include a link to where you can watch it, listeners, free and not through the dark web.
Yeah, there's basically just a commentary track by a TV critic, screenwriter Gary Girani. He's done other ones for the Blu-ray is released by Kino Lorber, and he's done other commentary tracks for their other TV releases. And it has some interesting information about the conception and production of the Questor Tapes, its themes and tones, broadcasting history, etc. And there's also the trailers for the Questor Tapes, and that's pretty well it. So it's a pretty bare bones release in that perspective. And interestingly enough, first thing that will probably strike many viewers is this is a 4:3 presentation, so it's not widescreen. At first, when you start watching something like that, it takes you out because you're saying, "Oh, look at all the picture on my TV that's not being used." But once the story started up, I've totally forgot about the black bars on either side. I don't know if you guys had that same experience, but some other interesting tidbits about this. This is the last thing that Gene L. Coon worked on. He passed away shortly before the movie aired, which is most unfortunate. DC Fontana did the novelization of the movie, and she dedicated it to Gene L. Coon. Originally, Leonard Nimoy was offered the role of Questor, and he was in fact had signed to do it. But for whatever reason, Gene Roddenberry changed his mind and cast Robert Foxworth in the role instead. I personally think it would have been a bad idea for Leonard to do this role. It's too much like Spock. I think Robert Foxworth, a very slim Robert Foxworth, did a pretty fantastic job in the role. It's a thankless role for him in a way because he can't really emote, and he has to do all these kind of mechanical gestures and motions that don't make the character somebody that you initially can really warm to or relate to. But I think by the end of the movie, he's had quite a arc, and I found him pretty likable. The actor that I think that really makes this whole thing work, though, is Mike Farrell. I think his Jerry Robinson as the engineer, he adds the humanity to that's missing from Questor. Plus, he also into the story. He's the everyman. And he sells everything. There's never a moment in here where I felt that the story point was awkward or handled awkwardly because he was able to do it. He's got that Richie Cunningham, Ron Howard vibe. I think that really grounds the story. And I'm just curious, talking about the two leads, and I'll throw it to you this time, Jesse. What do you think of them and the two characters?
What's interesting to see BJ, right, in a different role. I thought he was really well done in this. I thought his connection, his stubbornness, where instead of calling him, was really well done. And I thought there was enough humor in the role, and Mike played it really well, that he was trying to do the right thing for this person, this android he helped build, and the idea that you can be a friend, right? The intelligence was a really nice subplot. I got a little tired of Robert Foxworth's robotic speak and the use of weird words. I don't know if it seemed a little robotic, pardon the pun, and I don't know if that how it seems, and I'm rewriting, there seems like a better way to show Questor's journey as a becoming sentient and doing that. But that was just a little off-taking to me. But they had great chemistry as friends. I loved their kind of buddy cop time together in the casino and the different discussions. It really does fall on these two leads to carry the movie. And I think they overall did a really good job. I would have liked to see Nemo. Nemo, gosh, did this. It would have been interesting. I know Robert Foxworth from Falcon Crest, right? The 80s primetime drama. Yeah. But yeah, it was a fun hour and a half. And you do see it, because it had to do a lot of world building. And they did it overall, really communicated, and the two leads were very enjoyable.
All right. Karen.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I read some trivia about it that Foxworthy was offered the role of BJ Honeycutt on MASH. And of course, it ended up that Mike Farrell took the role. So it's an interesting little connection there. He's one of my favorites on MASH for sure. So seeing him in this with that similar aw shucks vibe, and I get what you're saying with the Richie Cunningham, it definitely feels that way to me. Yeah. Without being goody two shoes, which I appreciated that in the Questor tapes where he has interactions with the Countess lady, whatever her name is. I'm sorry, I've forgotten. But yeah, he definitely has those qualities, which I also like in his MASH character. And I liked that they made him smart without being cocky. Because you get a lot of like scientist roles where the guy is too good for his own farts. Yeah. I hate to say it that way. And I will say, I agree with Jesse on the acting, on the android acting. Just 1 year before this was Westworld. And to put it up to that example, Yul Brynner was a very convincing android. And I think Questor was convincing enough to allow me to buy into it. But there were some choices there that were a little not so great. But I think he did a good job. Androids weren't all over the place at that time. So it was difficult to like get into the head of an android.
Can you give me an example of one of the things that you found off-putting?
His movements weren't exactly right. He would be very wooden, and then all of a sudden he would do something that's not as wooden. So it broke that but I think he did a good job. I'm not.
No, I was just curious. That's all.
Yeah, it's the 70s. Like I said, there weren't androids on every show back then. And I do see the influences on Data in that role. Sure. So yeah, I liked it from that perspective as well. But I really love these two. And of course, John Vernon, I know him best from Animal House, which is so stupid. But he plays Dean Wormer in Animal House. And to see him in this role, this is a very him role. And to see him play it as straight as possible, I think he was good for this as well. So
Yeah.
the acting,
Yeah.
I can't complain.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah. No, I was to jump. Maybe I'm jumping ahead, but I did want to talk about Vernon. He is such a iconic 70s, 60s, 70s TV presence.
Yeah.
When
Mhm.
you look at his IMDb page, it
Yeah.
was everywhere.
Yeah.
And this is those where you could make a good living just episodic TV.
Yeah.
Sure.
And absolutely Animal House, you know him, but this is that guy.
Yeah.
The guy that is the straight-laced
Commanding figure, authority
yeah,
figure.
Yep.
figure.
Stentorian voice. And
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
He did a lot of
Commands-
voiceovers as
Commands
well,
respect.
which I like.
Yeah.
Oh, that voice is amazing, and he
Yeah.
looks that it's an interesting face.
Hmm.
It's not quite handsome, but it's also very rugged and looking.
Yep.
He is such a strong presence in this and what a nice little arc for him
Hmm.
in this thing. I think and I know you mentioned Gene Coon, and I know that a lot of people have tried to make sure that he gets the credit because Roddenberry, rightly the creative vision behind Star Trek, but Gene Coon did so much so in a lot of ways, he's Bill Finger almost of the Batman, where
Yeah.
he is the unsung hero.
Yes.
So it's
exactly.
nice to see that they get co-credit on this.
Mhm. Just an interesting note that because Karen mentioned the lady, it's Lady Helena Trimble.
Thank you.
And if you are a Star Trek fan, you will recognize that name. Trimble is probably a shout out to Bijo Trimble, who led the letter writing campaign that gave Star Trek, the original Star Trek, its third season.
Oh.
So
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
so,
very cool.
yeah. Let's talk like that. If you want to talk about the other characters, I'll let you. I think most of them are just filling story roles. Though I would say that Lady Helena Trimble, if they had gone to series, I think that role could have been an interesting one. There could have been like a triangle between her, Questor, and Robinson. That would have been interesting to see. But the main regret I have from the movie is that we didn't get to see more of the interactions between her and Bester and Questor and Robinson. The control unit, the area where he was able to link into all the government things and all whatnot is quaint, especially by today's standards. But it did look like somebody with a bunch of computer screens doing social media, basically. So
Yeah.
I got kind of a kick
With
out
the
of it.
cone
Actually.
of silence from Get Smart. Yeah.
Yeah. And to Jesse's point, when he pressed 3 buttons to turn things off, I said,
Oh.
okay, we get it. Then he pressed 4 more buttons, and I'm going, okay, we get it. Why did
Yeah.
you just have one button to turn everything off at the same time and then another button to raise the helmet? Like that, those are the little things that really date the show. And but I think they just wanted to show off some technology there. So in general, I don't really have much more to say about any of the other actors. They fulfilled their functions story-wise, but I don't really think they added performance-wise. I don't really think there was much for them to do. So
can I ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
Walter Koenig was in it, right? Is he
Yep.
the guy who walked in the door?
Yep.
And then walked back out?
Yep. And
Okay, that was the weirdest thing ever. What?
I think it was just they were just doing him
A solid?
Is that solid kind of thing.
Okay.
He's just walked up. I think he had 2 scenes. He walked up the corridor and opened the door,
Yeah.
and then he closed
Yeah.
the door, and that was it. It's like
Very
okay.
weird.
no lines.
Yeah.
There was just an Easter egg, and I don't even know if he got paid.
That one thing where he walks in the door and then walks back out.
Yeah.
Super strange.
Yeah. I did want to just mention James Shigeta,
Yep.
who played
Yeah.
Dr. Chen. That is someone else that he was a co-star for Elvis in, I think it's Blue Hawaii. It might have been a
Wow.
different one.
Was he on
Yeah,
Quincy? Or is that what different actor that played the
yeah,
assistant?
I think a different one. But yeah,
Okay.
once again, Tara, he actually did, it was in a Babylon 5 episode.
Hmm.
As
We
was Robert Foxworth.
Yeah,
Foxworthy.
yeah.
Foxworth.
And
But
once again, when you look at his IMDb page, just over and over episodes, and it was just interesting to see a young him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that's part of the fun of seeing these older movies,
yeah.
seeing younger actors when they were young. So yeah, I do think that the in setting up the science, as you
Hmm.
mentioned, the idea, is this a thing?
Yeah.
Is this just a computer, or is it an actual person, right? And so it just, I think, it is an interesting premise that, as you mentioned, we're still exploring.
Hmm.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And I see a lot of shades of what was to come in the next generation
Yeah,
in
for
this.
sure. So let's delve into that a little bit because the premise of the show is interesting in that the tapes that are to download all the knowledge that Questor needs have been tampered with, and unfortunately for him, the parts that deal with emotions have been erased. So you can see very much the Tin Man analogy here from The Wizard of Oz. He has no heart. And much like Data, he regrets not being able to feel human. And John Vernon has that great line that says, "Then you're a fool that you want that." I think that the ideas in this movie for Data are pretty blatantly there. That's not even hidden in any way, shape, way, or form. So it's been whatever they had in this movie. Gene Roddenberry co-opted it and put it into Star Trek: The Next Generation. And in a way, you could say that Questor is Data's great grandfather, so something to that effect.
How many greats would that be? That's a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah, exactly. Just Karen, any general thoughts about the Data blueprint here?
Yeah. You even see shades of him in storylines where he's fully functional with Tasha.
Yeah, that line stood out.
There's a line in there, yeah. So him also wondering whether he can be a friend to someone. That's very Data. Just you say blatant, I get that, but it's the same creator.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that he took something that he wanted to do and put it in another project because you can see that he's fallen in love with that character. And I love that he takes it and he doesn't just recycle it. He makes it better in Data. And of course, there's a few years in between, but I really do seeing the precursor
Mm-hmm.
to his other stuff. I like it a lot. And there were shades of his other projects in this that weren't Data as well. I can't think of one right off the bat, but character of Jerry, you could see shades of him in certain characters on The Next Generation and other Enterprise, other things like
Wesley
that.
Crusher.
Sure, a little Wesley Crusher, not quite as naive. A little Beverly Crusher as well. That kind of smart without being
Riker.
conceited. Little Riker, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like seeing that, the
Mhm.
evolution of those characters into something else. And that he must have been happy that he could recycle that because you can tell that he loved this project and he wanted to make more of it.
Yeah.
And so he took that and put it in something else. And that's just fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Jesse.
Yeah. According to IMDb, there was a scene where Questor does make love to the lady
Helena.
Tremble.
Lady Helena, yeah.
Mm.
And that was cut by the censors, and therefore, when he was able to do it with Next Generation, I'm sure Gene was like, "Yes."
Yeah.
I also think there is a little bit of the Earth needs guidance from Gary Seven
Yep.
that was in that, and also we talk
Good
about
call.
the idea of where in the very beginning of Next Generation, where John Delancey's character is talking about is humankind going to grow?
Mhm.
So I think this is a common theme. And I think it is, if you're going to steal from yourself,
Yeah.
right? There is somewhere on the internet, it's easy to find, but you can Google the times that Eric Sorkin uses the same line in different projects.
Yeah.
Where he's in love with a line, like in one of them, I can't quote perfectly, but like a father tells a child, all you have to do to make me proud is to come home safe every night. Yeah. And so, yeah, there is that. And I think it would be easy to criticize Roddenberry if this series had gone a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
Then
Yeah.
you're like, okay, you're retreading use.
Yeah.
But since you did not get this, then you can go and
Purpose.
refresh and rethink. We're talking about a JMS wants to redo Babylon 5 set in the same kind of universe, but a refresh of, similar to Battlestar Galactica did. We want to freshen this up. So I think it's really well done. And it is, you see that the themes that was important to Roddenberry about humanity and the setting up that this is the last of the Questors, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see that, and I assume that was the matte painting you're talking about,
Yep.
where you see
Yep.
all the different
Mhm.
things.
Yeah.
That the premise of, okay, I'm damaged, so therefore I need a human companion. That sets up our brotherhood.
Yeah.
The idea that Vernon sacrifices himself, which is very emotional considering we had not spent that much time with them, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That
I really don't buy that moment, but yeah,
okay.
that's my biggest complaint about the movie. But
You
yeah.
think it was overly, he would have found a different way?
Yeah, I think he would have taken Questor and tried to make money off of him.
Oh, you
Yeah.
don't
That
think he would have wouldn't have
moral,
changed his mind? He
yeah.
wouldn't have had the
Yeah,
road
no.
to Damascus moment?
No, I didn't buy that. But
No, and I think Jerry was more in that role, and they didn't need to make, what's his name? Jeff.
Daryl,
They didn't need to change him.
yeah.
That's just
Okay.
my thought.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so we've gotten to the mountain, so to speak,
Yeah.
Mount Ararat, which I think is a cool little add to the mythos of the series. And we get that map painting with the seemingly endless stretch of, and while visually it makes a great image, logically it makes no sense at all. Why would you keep all these android bodies there to be discovered? Maybe you could argue that in the future that mankind would want to see all these things just to find out what has been going on. But the first time I watched it, when I said that, do they add a new table every time the next android's coming? But when he said, when Questor said that he would be the last one, and yet that he has a lifespan of 200 years, I'm thinking even back in 1974, if this movie had taken place in real time, let's say that's 40 years ago, or 50 years ago, it's interesting to think, and this is the central premise of the movie, which is very much based on the prime directive from the Federation, Star Trek, that we don't interfere, we just observe. I'm wondering how Questor would be feeling about his prediction right now, based on the way things are today. And this is where I think the relevance of the movie really shines forth, is that here this movie is proposing within the next 200 years that we're going to get our shit together and they don't need the androids anymore. And curious, Karen, as to how that struck you, that whole the premise of the story. What did you think of that? Did you like it, or did it make you feel like Vernon, that he doesn't like the idea of humankind being manipulated?
Yeah, I think that was a good conceit for how he came to be. One of my questions was, how did all of those other Questors come into being?
Yes.
Were they all
That's the
sent?
yeah.
Because they had to build Questor.
Yep.
So how did all the other ones get there? And that kind of took me out of it for a second, but it's a very small hand wave to me, because they show that they have a larger purpose than just, hey, there's an android we're making. And
yeah.
I will say I love, and this strikes me every time I see one of Gene Roddenberry's projects, he was incredibly prescient. This was long before real robots, which we have now. They're not good, but we do have them. And he predicted like the iPad kind of thing and the cell phone. And there's notes of him saying, here's where technology is going to go in all of his projects. And I really appreciate that. And I would like to think that we're better than we were back then, but I kind of wonder if we're not worse than we were in the 70s, to be honest. Climate change, people are dug into their opinions on things and never want to change, even if they know deep down they're wrong. I think that's a lot of what goes on today. If they really question themselves, they would rethink their thoughts on things. And a lot of our laws have gone backwards recently. We're burning books. Women don't have agencies over their bodies. There's just so many things that have gone backwards. And it was nice to see some optimism that was going on in the 70s. I would like to have some of that back.
Jesse.
Yeah, it is funny, the idea that we thought that within 200 years we would be out of adolescence. This is 40 years later, so I guess we still have 160 years to get our crap together.
Yeah.
But right now we are not looking good.
Yeah.
I didn't have a problem with the change of plans, the conversion. Change of heart, just because it was the pilot and you wanted that. Though I think it would have been more interesting that he could have been their ongoing nemesis.
Absolutely.
That this was still wanting to do that. But it does give the actor a chance to bond and kind of show a change of heart. Yeah, I assume that normally the previous Questor is the one who builds his or her replacement there.
Yes.
So that's this idea that something has gone wrong, and that is the premise of trying to figure out what's happening. I had thought that the premise would be more searching for this Questor Tapes, I think it would have been a longer journey to try to find his purpose and what's going on. And I think in a modern era, that's what it would be, right? That would have been season 1's finale. And then you'd reset the premise of going forward, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It is interesting about what would Questor have to be doing today to try to steer humanity back towards a positive future. And as Karen mentioned, the pilot doesn't answer the question where the androids originally came from. I assume it's probably something like the Gary 7 episode from Star Trek, The Assignment Earth, which was also a backdoor pilot, where there's a race of aliens that I think in that episode they were called the Protectors. So I think it's something similar to that, where there's some sort of advanced race out there that's trying to nurture all these other burgeoning civilizations onto the proper path of development. So that would be a question that I would think that would be answered later on, and that might be like the overarching series storyline. Though with 200 years, that's a lot of seasons to drag it out for. But they could accelerate it, or maybe there'd be some reason for why it would be necessary for Questor to somehow contact his creators. The big thing that sticks out for me in this whole thing is all those previous androids had to be created as well, as you said, Jesse, by their forefathers. So they must have done it there in Mount Ararat, because there's not the technology available to create all these androids. So why is Questor being created in a lab as opposed to the way all the other androids were being created? So that's the big or a question I have about why it was done this way. And then maybe there might be a series episode that could answer that question. But as the movie stands, it's a big logic gap in the movie. So
I assume that something went wrong with his creator, and therefore
it must have been due to you said the radiation thing, but
so that now this did strike me a little bit as the Phantom, where there is a legacy of phantoms, and there is in the Skull Cave, all the phantoms are buried.
Hmm.
So that kind of gave me a little bit of feel for that.
Yeah.
Also, you could have had the premise that you could do episodes of previous Questers, seen that where you could
Yeah.
have done that.
Yeah. Like the premise of the story is pretty ripe for
Yeah.
going in a lot of different directions for sure. Sadly, the movie actually was given a go-ahead for a 13 pilot or 13 episode season. Good old NBC wanted to slot it at 10 o'clock at night, and Roddenberry said no way. And they also wanted Roddenberry, to remove the Robinson character and just have Questor going alone. And
Mm.
Roddenberry said no to that as well. And because of that, the series was dropped, even though Foxworth and Farrell had both signed on for a 13 episode season. It's unfortunate. I think that probably the last thing I would talk about here, though I have a few interesting anecdotes that are not totally relevant to the movie, but just for later, for pop culture reference. But I do think that even today, this with some retooling, this could be a very good series. I think, especially even more today. And Jesse, how do you feel about that? Would you be interested in if they did a series like that and you in present like a reboot, start over with a new pilot and everything?
Yeah, this has a little feel of Quantum Leap. I like the idea of this guardian that is helping us. You talked about the prime directive. In this case, there you play loose and fast with the prime directive, right? He talks
Hmm.
about a whisper here, a push there, a trying to do things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this would have been a very interesting in modern times you could do this well, where
Mm.
the idea of trying to figure out your humanity, figuring out also this,
Purpose.
because we all have that and all concerned about that. Yeah, so I'd buy into this. This would be a fun series.
All right. Karen.
I agree. I think it could be easily updated, especially now that we're getting into this whole AI thing.
Hmm.
We're getting more into automation with real robots. We're not close to having androids, but we are getting close to having technology that would lend itself. We have cloning, DNA replication. There's a lot of different things that might lend itself to creating an AI inside a person's body. So if that makes sense, I don't know if I'm making sense, but I do think that where we are today, technology wise, might lend itself very well to this concept. I do know that they discussed redoing it at one point, like in the early 2010s or something like that.
Hmm.
I think that would have been interesting too, because we were at a completely different point in our technological evolution. So I wouldn't mind seeing this updated, to be honest. I think it would be very interesting to see how they could use like AI predictions to put together a story.
Yeah. And it could be done in a dark manner, but I think was Jesse was alluding to, it could be like a Highway to Heaven show as well, or a Quantum Leap
Sure.
show. And I think that we could use an uplifting show. Like I love a dark show as the next person, but I do like uplifting shows, though they are, I think, a lot harder to pull off without becoming a schmaltzy or whatnot. But there
I
is a way
would
to
I
do it.
would say something like Ted Lasso,
Yeah,
which I
something like
think
that.
did a great job
Yeah,
in that arena.
yeah,
It was serious and funny and also very,
yeah.
uh,
Touching. Yeah,
looking
Yeah,
forward type
yeah,
of thing.
yeah, for sure.
absolutely.
All right. You guys got anything else you want to say? Karen, anything else you want to say about the movie?
No, oh, I will give you one little note. When I put it on yesterday, I had put it on a hard drive and
Hmm.
connected it up to the TV. And so I was watching it on the big TV, and my husband walked by and he said, "Oh my goodness, what is that you're watching? It's got to be something I saw," because he watched all that stuff, and from the theme song he could tell, okay, this is early 70s. I'm sure I watched it. And he came in and he said, "Oh yeah, I think I watched that." And he stood there in the doorway a little bit watching, and he said, "Yep, this was my thing." And he says, Night Stalker. He mentions a bunch of stuff that he watched, and I thought, yeah, I could see that definitely.
Yeah. Cool.
I-
Jesse?
Yeah, I was smiling at the costumes, the very thick ties,
Yeah.
and
The
and then
huge lapels,
Collars.
yes,
right?
and then the leisure suits that were known from Steve Austin's $6 Million Man
Yep,
would
yep.
wear that everywhere.
Yeah.
So it brought back a lot of memories of me watching this TV. So it is. I'm glad that it's there and we're getting to share.
Yeah.
So and I was really happy. I was
something-
really happy.
Something else occurred to me too. They did a lot of things that I thought would come back up, and I was surprised it didn't. Like, she emphasizes very strongly what the sequence is to get into that secret passage, and then it's never used again. Why would she emphasize that?
I think they're just trying to show off tech in the 70s.
Yeah, but there were a couple little things, and I thought they were like lamp hangers, and then they never came up again, and I was like,
well,
okay,
maybe they would have in the series.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
A couple things I want to point out, that they have the scene in the casino where he realigns the dice, and that is a scene that's also recreated in Star Trek Next Generation second season episode, The Royale.
Oh, yeah.
Where Data fixes the dice when he's trying to roll. And it's funny that your husband mentioned the Night Stalker, because the music in this, and I have to say, overall, the music in this thing is probably the worst part of the whole movie. It's that very jazzy 70s and has no bearing to what's happening on the screen kind of music. And you're like, why are you playing this right now? This is not doing anything. This is distracting me from the story type of music, which I found for 70 movies was or TV shows was quite often. But the composer of this, Gilles Millet, I believe is how you pronounce it, he did a fair bit of TV and movie work. And Karen, you mentioned Kolchak, the Night Stalker. If I don't know if you both recall it, but there's like a violin riff in there, and that is totally in the Night Stalker. So they lifted that from this, because this predates the Night Stalker. But that violin riff with the that's totally the Night Stalker. When I heard that, I go, "What? Wait a minute, what?"
Yeah, but that's very 70s.
Yeah.
That music, very 70s.
But I think the Night Stalker's music is way better than this.
Yeah.
And it does remind me of the 70s Amazing Hulk, and this whole back then there is no arc, right? So you got to have the little case of the week. Yeah. And so the idea, you could absolutely see that Roddenberry is trying to push the genre, but at the same time keep it so it's palatable to not only the networks, but to fandom.
Yeah. I think out of all of the non-Star Trek things that he did, this one has the most potential. Something really good. But unfortunately,
he did use that potential later on.
Yes.
Yeah.
In different ways.
Yeah.
So
sure.
Yeah.
That's everything I've got. I'm glad that neither one of you seen this before. So
I just looked it up, and he actually did the music for Kolchak, the Night Stalker.
Yes, he did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know whether you mentioned that or not.
Yeah. This is, I don't want to say it's an overlooked gem or forgotten gem, but I do definitely think it's something that's fallen by the wayside, because there's just so much content out there nowadays. And because this was a made-for-TV movie, a lot of people probably missed it when it aired. And why would you pick it up on Blu-ray or DVD later on if you never saw it in the first place? So it's a curio, but I do think it's definitely worth watching. And from your responses, I believe you both felt the same way.
Yeah,
agreed.
Why did you think to pick it up on Blu-ray, Lou?
Oh, because it just brought back fond memories.
Okay, I just didn't know how you'd seen it and how you happened to run into it.
I think I've even read I was a big original Star Trek fan, so anything Roddenberry did, I was always trying to, and that was not easy to do back in the pre-internet days.
Yeah,
but for some reason, this one just, I don't know if I caught a commercial on TV for it before it came out, and the whole idea of an android back then was like, wow, this is really cool. Because I was a big Lost in Space fan, and I loved the robot from Lost in Space as well.
Sure.
So this was right up my alley. And I remember the gist of the story, but I'd forgotten the finer details. And even though we didn't talk about it too much, I thought Lou Ayres, another great character actor from, I think he's more from the 50s and 60s, but in his prime, because he's pretty old, and the scenes that he has, he adds the right amount of solemnity to the storyline. And that's where you need these good character actors to sell probably the hardest parts of the story to swallow. I always find it works out the best when you have a really good character actor that can pull that kind of stuff off. And he did that quite well, even with his eyes closed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So,
Yeah, that was a good role for him.
yeah.
I'll also mention that this was nominated for a Hugo in 1975, and it was up against Zardoz, Gordon, not Slash Gordon, Phantom of the Paradise, and the winner was Young Frankenstein. It was up against some pretty big stuff, and the fact that they would single this out was nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just reading now, there have been a couple of attempts to do a remake. Unfortunately, one attempt fell apart in the 2000s when the person behind it was working with Gene Roddenberry's son, but he passed away before he could get to work on it. And in 2010, Roddenberry Productions announced that it was working with Imagine Television on a pilot, but nothing's further come out of that. So that's 14 years now. So I think we can safely assume that nothing is going to come of that. But
Yeah.
I do really think that this would be worth something for somebody to revisit and do something with it. But that's about it. That's all I've got to say on it. And I'm glad that you both enjoyed it. And I highly recommend to anybody out there, especially if you're of our age, this is a great time capsule back into 70s television. And it was great to see a lot of these character actors in their prime, and all within a story that is even more relevant today than when it was made back in the 70s. Good ideas never really die. As we've discussed, they keep getting recycled and reused.
Agreed. And a lot of things were before their time.
Yeah.
And I think the story was a little before its time.
Yep. All righty. With that, I want to say thank you very much to my co-hosts, Jesse, Karen. Thank you very much for
You're
indulging
welcome.
in this a little bit of walk down memory lane. And for all our listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And till next time, stay safe and let's be careful out there. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
And scene.
The proceeding has been a JKL Media production.